Hey everyone, Bob Thibodeau here. This is another episode of Ask Bob. Now, as you probably heard in some of the references in our training material and things like that, I've been called the podcast Yoda. And I got that nickname by helping out on some Facebook groups where I was leaving some tips about podcasting. And someone said, you're like the Yoda of podcasting. Then someone else chimed in, yeah, you're a real podcast Yoda. And the nickname is just stuck. Okay. But in this series of podcasts, I answer your questions about podcasting. And I'll provide insight from time to time on common questions I've been asked. But specifically, I'm looking at your questions about podcasting. Now, I call this section of our podcast training program Ask Bob. So if you have a question on podcasting, send it my way. Amen. Now, I'd recommend that you subscribe to this platform so that you'll be updated every time another question is answered and another episode is published. You can ask me a question right now if you want. You can go to our website at podcast-training.com, click on the little contact form at the top, and send along your question. If I use your question on the podcast, I'll give you a shout out for it and send you along a free download of my book, The Complete Guide to Podcasting. It's a $37 value, and I'll send it to you for free if we use your question on the program. If you have a podcast or a website, put that information down in the contact form as well. And if we use your question, I'll give your podcast and your website a plug and put down in the show notes on our podcast as well. So try and send you some additional traffic. So ask Bob whatever question you may have concerning podcasting. Now, we've been talking about different questions people have concerning starting a podcast. Is it difficult to do? Is it complicated? Is it cost efficient? What am I going to talk about? Will anybody listen to me? How do I build an audience? And those are questions that we've been answering. So let's take a few minutes to answer the question now about last time I talked about what we'll talk about. Today I want to talk about, will anybody listen to me? Will anybody listen? Hello, anybody out there type thing, right? Well, the simple answer is, in my best lawyer voice, that depends. I know, it's not really an answer, but it definitely applies to podcasting. Someone who's just starting out may end up with thousands of downloads per episode. Someone who's been doing this for years may only have a handful of downloads per episode. But one thing is for sure, if you do not have a podcast, nobody will be listening to you. Now, that being said, there are certain things that will help you in building a listening audience. And number one on the list is your friends and your relatives. I know that's not who you're trying to reach, or maybe in a limited way. I don't know, but by asking your friends and your relatives to like, rate, leave comments, and share your podcast, that will actually help your podcast to grow. Think about this. Let's say someone somehow finds your podcast and they click on it, they go to your podcast page. And what would be more impressive to that person who has no clue who you are? A page that has 50 or 60 episodes and total of maybe 200 downloads, 4 downloads per episode or so, but no comments. Or a page that shows 200 downloads and several hundred comments. And I'm not talking about comments like nice, on every single comment. I'm talking about comments on each, let's say, the topic matter of each episode. Which one would be more impressive to you? Now, if you get your friends, your family, your coworkers, etc., to do you a favor, that's how you put it. Can you do me a favor? Like, comment on every episode, share the episode on your social media. That will help me out so much. Do me a favor. Can you help me out? You'd be surprised at how quickly others will also catch on and be viewing your podcast or listening to your podcast. You'll have people you do not even know coming to your page and being impressed. And it will definitely help you grow as they start sharing with their social media. But you need to leverage the contacts you currently have, your existing contacts, which is your friends, your family, your coworkers, and all of them. That is a great starting point. That makes sense, right? All right. Now, there are other techniques we'll go over as well in the future about how to grow your listening audience. But I wanted to give you this one, just in answer to that question. Will anybody listen? Because yes, they will listen if you do publish your podcast. Somebody will listen somewhere. You probably won't see 1 million downloads right off. You're not going to make $1 million a year podcasting right off. It's possible, but more than likely it's not going to happen. It's going to take you time. energy, investment to do that. But you have to start somewhere. You have to start at ground zero, just like everybody else. But I can guarantee you this: if you do not start your podcast, nobody will listen to you. It's that easy. Nobody will have the information you are trying to share because you didn't start a podcast. Now, if you find this podcast and these videos helpful, please give us a rating and comment down below because it helps others to find this information just like we told you how to do it. Now, and I thank you in advance for doing that. Now, over the course of these podcasts, I want to answer your questions that you may have concerning podcasting. You can leave your questions in the comments below, but a better way of communicating with me about your questions is to use the contact form on our website, podcast-training.com. Click on the little contact form, fill out the question, and hit submit. Now, if I use your question on our podcast, then I will send you along a free download of my book, The Complete Guide to Podcasting. It's a $37 value, but you'll receive it for free just for submitting your question, and we use it on the show. Now, if someone answers or asks the same question as you, the first one that submits it is the one who gets all the bennies. All right. So that's how I determine who that goes to. Who knows? You may see an increase in your traffic because I will put links to your podcast and your website down below if you share that information with me as well. I'll share it with my subscribers too. So if you have a question, don't hesitate. Today, go to podcast-training.com, click on the contact form, and send us along your question. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast. That way you're notified when a new question is answered and a new episode is published. Now, in the next episode, I'll answer the question, how do I build an audience? So come back then. But also in the show notes down below, I have a link to a free podcast creation checklist. This checklist is the same outline I use in my podcast training program. Of course, I go in a lot more depth in my program, but this outline will guide you through all of the steps necessary. You just follow it along, you implement, you will have a podcast. Okay, so come back on the next episode as we discuss how do I build an audience, and we'll talk to you then. In the meantime, get out there and start your podcast.